A child can learn a surprising amount from a conversation that lasts less than 30 seconds. Not the conversation itself, the tone, the reaction, the expression on a parent's face, the things adults barely think about. Most of childhood isn't made up of major milestones. It's made up of ordinary moments that happen over and over again. The morning rush before leaving the house, a trip to the park, a family gathering, a bedtime routine that takes much longer than expected. Nothing about these moments seems especially important while they're happening. Yet they often leave a much bigger impression than parents realize. In the previous part of this series, we explored several everyday habits that can quietly influence a child's confidence. Today, we're continuing that conversation with 5 more. And what's interesting about these mistakes is how normal they look. Most don't sound harsh. Most don't sound harmful. In fact, some of them are things loving parents do every single day. That's what makes them easy to miss. The first one often happens in the middle of a completely ordinary conversation. And once you notice it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. A 6-year-old starts explaining what happened during recess. The explanation takes a while. There are side stories, unnecessary details, characters appear without introductions, then disappear without explanation. At some point, a squirrel becomes part of the story. Nobody is entirely sure why. The child pauses. An adult immediately fills the silence. "Oh, so Jacob took your ball." The child nods. The conversation moves forward. Problem solved. Or at least it seems that way. What adults often forget is that speaking is a skill that's still under construction. Young children don't organize thoughts the same way older children or adults do. They often discover what they want to say while they're saying it. That's why a simple story can take several minutes. They're sorting through memories in real time, choosing details, connecting events, trying to translate an experience into words. When adults step in too quickly, the conversation becomes more efficient, but something else disappears: the opportunity to finish the thought independently. And this isn't limited to storytelling. It happens during everyday situations. A child is trying to answer a question. Someone supplies the answer. A child is searching for the right word. Someone provides it. A child is explaining what happened. Someone summarizes it. Each individual moment feels harmless. Most adults aren't even aware they're doing it. In fact, many interruptions come from enthusiasm. The adult thinks they're helping. They already understand where the conversation is headed. Why not speed things up? The problem is that children experience these moments differently. Imagine telling someone about an important part of your day. Halfway through the story, they begin finishing your sentences. Then they explain your point for you. Then they decide they've understood enough and move on. Most adults would find that frustrating. Not because the listener was rude, because the story no longer felt like theirs. The same thing can happen to children, only they usually don't complain about it. Instead, the change tends to happen gradually. The child begins offering fewer details. Stories become shorter. Questions receive one-word answers. Conversations that used to happen naturally begin fading away. Parents sometimes interpret this as personality. He's just quiet. She doesn't talk much. But in some cases, the child simply became accustomed to having someone else carry the conversation. Now, this doesn't mean children should be allowed to talk endlessly without guidance. Every conversation doesn't need to last 20 minutes. Sometimes they genuinely need help expressing themselves. The difference lies in how that help is given. There's a difference between taking over a conversation and supporting it. One ends the child's effort. The other encourages it. A simple question can do that. What happened next? Then what did you do? Tell me more about that. Those responses keep the child in the driver's seat.
And something interesting happens when children feel genuinely listened to. They become more willing to share, more willing to explain, more willing to speak when something matters. Because communication isn't only about language, it's also about confidence. The confidence that your thoughts are worth expressing. The confidence that somebody is interested in hearing them. The confidence that your voice has a place in the conversation. And that confidence often develops one ordinary interaction at a time. Which brings us to the second mistake. A mistake that usually appears during the busiest part of the day, when patience is running low and everyone is trying to get somewhere.
It's 7:45 in the morning. Shoes need to be on. Bags need to be packed. Breakfast needs to disappear from the table. And somehow the clock seems to be moving faster than usual. A parent calls out, "Go put your shoes on." The instruction is clear, simple, reasonable. Just a few moments later, nothing has happened. The child is still standing there. Maybe they're staring at the floor, or they've become fascinated by a toy they haven't touched in days, or they're halfway through a thought that nobody else can see. The parent repeats the instruction, this time with a little more urgency. Still no movement. Now frustration begins creeping into the conversation. How many times do I have to tell you? Most families have experienced some version of this scene. In fact, it happens so often that many people assume the problem is obvious. The child isn't listening. At least that's what it looks like. But appearances can be misleading. Ask an adult to stop what they're doing and immediately switch tasks. Even adults struggle with it. Imagine you're reading an important email. Someone suddenly tells you to stop and focus on something completely different. Your brain needs a moment. Not because you didn't hear the request, because transitions take time. Young children are still developing those transition skills, which means they often need longer than adults expect. Time to clean up. The child hears the words, but their attention is still attached to the game they're playing, the tower they're building, the story they're imagining. The world inside their head doesn't instantly disappear because somebody issued an instruction. There's often a delay, a processing period, a moment where one activity winds down before another begins. Adults frequently mistake that delay for defiance, but they're not always the same thing. Think about a child deeply focused on drawing. They're carefully choosing colors, adding details, working on something that feels important. Then suddenly they hear, "We're leaving." To an adult, leaving is simply the next step in the day. To the child, an entire experience has just been interrupted. And that transition isn't always easy. Now, this doesn't mean children should be allowed to ignore instructions. That's not the lesson. Structure matters, boundaries matter. Children need guidance. The challenge is recognizing the difference between unwillingness and adjustment, because they don't always look different from the outside. A child who needs a moment to switch gears can look exactly like a child refusing to cooperate. Yet the response required may be completely different. One needs firmer limits. The other needs a little time. Something as simple as a warning can completely change the interaction. In 5 minutes, we're going to leave. When this page is finished, it'll be time to clean up. Start thinking about your shoes because we're heading out soon. Those small signals give children a chance to prepare. The transition begins before the activity ends, and that often makes the next step much smoother. There's another reason this matters. When adults constantly expect immediate action, some children begin feeling like they're always behind, always disappointing someone, always moving too slowly. The instruction arrives, the frustration follows. The pattern repeats. Eventually, the child starts anticipating the frustration before it even happens. And that's a difficult way to move through the world, especially for a young child. Watch children when they're allowed a little space to complete a transition. Something interesting happens. Many become more cooperative, not less, because cooperation tends to grow when children feel understood rather than rushed. The goal isn't raising children who respond within 3 seconds.
The goal is helping them develop the ability to manage transitions successfully. That skill takes time, practice, and a surprising amount of patience. Which brings us to the third mistake, a mistake that often hides inside good intentions. It usually starts with a parent trying to help a child improve, and over time, it can change the way children approach learning itself.
A child sits at the kitchen table, drawing a picture. The sky is green. The dog is purple. The family cat somehow has 6 legs. They're completely absorbed in what they're creating. An adult walks by and immediately notices the mistakes. The sky isn't green. Dogs aren't purple. The corrections are small, accurate even. Most parents wouldn't see a problem. After all, helping children improve is part of the job. The issue isn't correction itself. Children need guidance. They need feedback. The issue is when nearly every activity becomes an opportunity for improvement. A word is pronounced incorrectly. A drawing isn't realistic. A shirt is buttoned the wrong way. Small corrections appear throughout the day. One by one, they seem insignificant. Together, they can change how a child approaches learning. Some children begin focusing less on what they're doing and more on whether they're doing it correctly. They hesitate before answering questions. They become reluctant to guess. They look for reassurance before trying something new. Mistakes start feeling more important than exploration. And that's unfortunate because childhood is naturally messy. Nobody learns to ride a bicycle without wobbling. Nobody learns to write neatly without producing pages of crooked letters. Getting things wrong isn't evidence that learning has failed. It's usually evidence that learning is happening. Of course, there are times when correction matters, but timing matters too. A child proudly showing a drawing isn't necessarily asking for advice. They're sharing something that made them excited. There will be plenty of opportunities to teach. The excitement itself is worth protecting. Children who feel safe making mistakes tend to keep experimenting. They keep trying. They stay curious. And curiosity is often where confidence begins. Because confidence doesn't come from getting everything right. It comes from knowing that getting something wrong is perfectly okay. And that brings us to the fourth mistake, one that often arrives disguised as humor. Fear doesn't only appear at bedtime. Sometimes it shows up at a birthday party. A child stands near the entrance, watching everyone else play. The room is loud. There are unfamiliar faces. Games are already underway. An adult gently encourages them to join in. The child doesn't move. A few moments later, someone laughs. There's nothing to be nervous about. The intention is good. The effect isn't always. Because nervousness doesn't disappear simply because another person thinks it should. The child is already uncomfortable. Now they also feel misunderstood. The same thing happens in dozens of everyday situations. The swimming lesson, the first day of school, the visit to the dentist, the friendly dog that suddenly feels much larger up close. Adults are looking at the situation. Children are experiencing it. Those are two very different perspectives. And confidence isn't built by pretending fear doesn't exist. Confidence develops when children discover they can move forward despite feeling afraid. That process usually starts with feeling understood. Think about the adults in your own life, the people who helped you through difficult moments. Most weren't helpful because they convinced you that your feelings were irrational. They were helpful because they listened first. Children need the same thing. A child who hears, "I know that felt scary," receives a very different message from a child who hears, "Stop being silly." One feels supported. The other feels judged. And over time, those experiences begin shaping how comfortable children are discussing difficult emotions. Some children become surprisingly good at hiding fears, not because the fears disappeared, because they learned those fears weren't welcome.
The conversation stopped. The worry remained. Parents often focus on helping children become brave, which makes perfect sense. Every parent wants that. But bravery isn't the absence of fear. Bravery is what happens when fear is acknowledged and a child keeps moving forward anyway. That's why understanding often comes before confidence. A child who feels safe talking about fears is far more likely to face them. A child who feels embarrassed by fears often spends more energy hiding them. And those are very different paths. Which brings us to the final mistake. A mistake that often lasts only a few seconds. Yet those few seconds can stay with a child much longer than parents realize.
A glass falls from the table. For a moment, everything is quiet. Then it shatters. The child freezes. Their eyes immediately move toward the nearest adult. Not toward the broken glass, toward the adult. They already know the glass can be replaced. What they're trying to figure out is something else. How bad is this? The answer often arrives before a single word is spoken. It's in the expression on the parent's face, the sigh, the sudden change in tone, the frustration that fills the room. Most adults have experienced moments like this. A long day, too little sleep, too many responsibilities. Something breaks, something spills, something goes wrong, and patience disappears faster than expected. The problem is that children rarely remember the day that led up to the reaction. They don't know about the stressful phone call, the unexpected bill, the difficult meeting. They only experience the moment in front of them. And in that moment, something important can happen. A mistake stops feeling like an event. It starts feeling like a threat. Think about how often children are learning something for the first time. Pouring a drink, carrying a plate, cutting with scissors, building something, writing something, trying something. Mistakes are unavoidable. They're part of childhood. In many ways, they're part of learning itself. Yet some children begin approaching mistakes as if they're walking through a minefield. They become extra careful, not in a healthy way, in a fearful way. The goal shifts. Instead of learning, they start trying to avoid getting something wrong. And those aren't the same thing. Watch a child who worries about making mistakes. Before attempting something new, they often ask, "Can you do it? Can you help me? What if I mess up?" The challenge itself isn't what worries them. It's the possibility of making an error. Sometimes that fear becomes so uncomfortable that children stop trying altogether. A puzzle remains unfinished. A drawing never gets started. A new activity is avoided. From the outside, it can look like a lack of motivation, but often something deeper is happening. The child has learned that mistakes carry too much emotional weight. There's another consequence that doesn't get talked about enough. Children who are afraid of reactions often become very good at hiding mistakes. The broken toy gets pushed under the bed. The spilled juice gets covered with a towel. The missing homework somehow remains a secret until the last possible moment. Adults sometimes interpret this as dishonesty, but fear is often sitting in the background. The child isn't thinking about integrity. They're thinking about consequences. They're trying to avoid the emotional storm they expect is coming. Ironically, the children who feel safest admitting mistakes are often the most honest. Not because they make fewer mistakes, because they aren't terrified of what happens after one. That doesn't mean mistakes should be ignored. Children need accountability. They need guidance. Actions have consequences, but consequences teach best when they're connected to the mistake itself, rather than the parent's anger. A spilled drink can be cleaned up. A broken toy may need to be repaired. A forgotten responsibility can be corrected. Those experiences teach valuable lessons. Fear teaches something else entirely.
One of the most powerful phrases a child can hear after making a mistake is, "Okay, let's figure this out." 4 simple words. No panic, no shame, no catastrophe. Just a problem that needs solving. Because that's ultimately what confidence looks like. It isn't believing you'll never make mistakes. It isn't believing everything will always go according to plan. It's trusting that when something goes wrong, you'll be able to handle it. Children develop that belief one experience at a time. A glass breaks, a mistake happens, a problem appears. And little by little, they learn that mistakes are part of life. Not emergencies, not disasters, not proof that something is wrong with them. Just part of the process of becoming capable. And that's a lesson that can stay with them long after childhood ends.
When people talk about confidence, they often picture the result: the child who raises their hand in class, the child who tries new things, the child who walks into unfamiliar situations without immediately backing away. What we don't often see are the thousands of small experiences that came before those moments. Confidence rarely appears all at once. It grows gradually, one interaction at a time. A child shares an idea and feels listened to. A child struggles with something difficult and gets the chance to keep trying. A child makes a mistake and discovers the world didn't fall apart. A child feels afraid and realizes they don't have to face that feeling alone. These moments may seem ordinary. Many of them last less than a minute. Yet childhood is built from moments exactly like these. That's why parenting can feel so challenging. The most important interactions are often the easiest to overlook. They're hidden inside rushed mornings, busy afternoons, bedtime routines, conversations that seem completely forgettable at the time. No parent gets every one of those moments right. That's never been the goal. Children don't need perfection. They need enough positive experiences to build trust in themselves. Trust that they can speak up. Trust that they can try. Trust that they can recover when things don't go as planned. And perhaps most importantly, trust that making mistakes doesn't make them less valuable. Because confidence isn't about believing you'll always succeed. It's about knowing that you'll be okay even when you don't. And that's one of the greatest gifts we can help children develop. Not certainty, not perfection, but the willingness to keep going, even when things feel difficult, even when things don't work the first time, even when the outcome is uncertain. Because that's where resilience grows, and confidence tends to follow close behind. We've covered 5 more confidence-shaping mistakes today, but this isn't the full list. Part 1 of this series explores 5 additional habits that many parents never realize can have a lasting impact. If you haven't seen it yet, you can click the video on your screen now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.